Now, a summit for Sudan being held in Paris has raised more than $2.1 billion to help alleviate the country's humanitarian crisis. But that's only around half of what's needed. Officials from France, Germany and the EU gathered in the French capital on the first anniversary of the conflict. Representatives from Sudanese civil society were also in attendance. French President Emmanuel Macron announced the money had been pledged, but did not provide a breakdown of the funding.
Even if today there are far too many conflicts, and there are conflicts that are covered more by the press and diplomatic efforts, our duty was to make it clear that we are not forgetting what is happening in Sudan, that we remain mobilized, that there are no double standards. This is why France, member of the Security Council and ally of Sudan with Germany and the European Union, took the initiative of this conference to show our will, our determination to put an end to this crisis from which people are suffering, to give hope and to engage alongside Sudanese men and women.
I spoke to Mathilde Vu, the advocacy manager for the Norwegian Refugee Council in Sudan. She was at that summit in Paris. I began by asking what impact the shortfall in funding would have.
Sure. I mean, yes, 2 billion sounds like an impressive amount, but you know what is even more impressive and more catastrophic is the amplitude of the crisis. We're talking about one of the world's largest displacement crisis, one of the world's most dire food crisis. So, you know, only half of the people who are in needs right now in Sudan and the neighboring countries will receive assistance if the funds and the pledging do not continue after today. What is really, you know, terrible for people in Sudan and the neighboring countries is that this crisis has been ongoing for a year and it has been completely neglected, completely forgotten. It's been a year of silence. It's been a year of neglect and a year a bit too late, I have to say, for the international solidarity to gather around Sudan and making sure that this country doesn't collapse further into atrocities, violence and famine.
The fact that the summit pledges are $2 billion short is bad enough, but we know with these things sometimes the money pledged doesn't even materialise. Is there a fear here that could happen, or does this seem secure enough to you?
There's a few things. Is that the pledges should be seen as a start of, international solidarity, not the end of it. So what we want as humanitarian working in Sudan and outside of Sudan with the refugee crisis is that this is only the beginning, and that, in a few months' time, when actually the crisis is going to reach appalling levels of suffering and hunger, more donors are going to come to the table, or donors who have already pledged will pledge more. Now, the second thing is, how fast can this pledging arrive in Sudan? Bureaucracy, and administrative things make it always a bit difficult for pledging to arrive on the ground. And what is very important here is that donors try and prioritize the people who can work now on the ground. And here I'm really referring to the local volunteers, the Sudanese volunteers that are already on the front line, that are already doing a lot of work. And that could be a recipient of a part of this funding and can actually, save lives right now, tomorrow, if they receive it.
We know there's indiscriminate attacks happening in Sudan. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says that war crimes, crimes against humanity, may have been committed in this year of conflict. Is the international community doing anything to protect these people?
That's a very good question. And I have to say the answer is no. These people have been really the backbone of humanitarian relief. They have stepped in when the international community and the NGOs and the UN were not there. And sadly, they are being harassed. They're being sometimes detained by parties to the conflict. And I don't think there is a recognition from the international community that not only should we support them for, the relief activity, but we should also ensure that when we engage with parties to the conflict, their civilian status is recognized. They are entitled to protection, and it's high time that us as a community, we recognize that and we fight for it.
The crisis is spilling over into South Sudan as people run for their lives. It's not the most stable of countries at the best of times. How is it coping with this influx of desperate people?
Absolutely. You're pointing out something very important, is that, Sudan was a country of asylum that turned into a war zone. And now people are fleeing to some of the most vulnerable, some of the most dire and isolated places in the world. And some of them are also the poorest. You're talking about South Sudan. I could also refer to Chad, Ethiopia, CAR, Egypt to some extent is also facing a lot of difficulties. And the neighboring countries do not have the resources to support refugees in a dignified manner and to the level of needs that is required. So this is why we're really calling the international community to play their part. Sudan was a country of asylum. Now it's time for the international community to help the asylum countries around Sudan to also support this influx.